I can't close my legs. 6 words that stopped 12 hardened bikers mid-conversation. Little Aisha stood in the doorway of Iron Wolves MC, trembling, her Sunday dress torn. Jax, the club's president, had seen violence, dealt it, survived it, but nothing prepared him for what this child was about to reveal. Her stepfather was the town's beloved deputy sheriff. Her mother refused to believe her. And Aisha. She'd walk 2 miles alone to find the scary men everyone warned her about. Because sometimes the monsters wear uniforms, and angels wear leather. What these bikers did next would challenge everything Harlanville believed about justice, family, and who the real protectors are. Real quick, drop your location in the comments. Let's see where this story reaches today. Now, back to that Saturday afternoon when Aisha walked into Iron Wolves' garage, Harlanville, Texas. Population 8,400. The kind of town where everybody knows your name, your business, and your grandfather's mistakes. Main Street still has a hardware store that's been run by the same family since 1952. The local diner serves coffee and chipped mugs that have witnessed 40 years of gossip. On Sunday mornings, church bells compete for attention across 4 denominations. It's the kind of place people call home with genuine affection, where folks still leave their doors unlocked and wave at strangers. But like most small towns, Harlanville has secrets. And on this particular Saturday afternoon in August, one of those secrets was about to walk through an open garage door and shatter everything. The Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club's clubhouse sat on the eastern edge of town, just past where the sidewalks give up, and the road turns to gravel. It wasn't much to look at. A converted warehouse with rust-stained metal siding, and a hand-painted sign that had faded to something between maroon and brown. But it was theirs. Inside that garage, 6 motorcycles in various states of repair sat like sleeping beasts, chrome catching the afternoon light that poured through the bay doors. The air hung thick with heat, and the smell of motor oil mixed with the distant sweetness of cut grass from somewhere down the road. These weren't the motorcycle clubs you see in movies. No matching leather vests with elaborate patches, no criminal empire, no violent initiations. Iron Wolves was something simpler and maybe more honest. They were mechanics, factory workers, a couple of veterans who'd come home from wars nobody wanted to talk about anymore. They were men who'd been divorced, fired, broken, rebuilt. Men who'd made peace with being outsiders in a town that valued conformity. They worked on their bikes, drank beer that was too warm, and mostly kept to themselves. They weren't angels. They'd never claimed to be. But they weren't devils either, despite what the church ladies whispered over their bridge games. Jax stood with his back to the open garage door, forearms deep in the engine of a 1987 Harley Sportster that had more problems than solutions. At 48, he carried himself like a man who'd learned when to fight and when to walk away. His Marine Corps tattoo had faded to blue-gray on his left shoulder. His hands bore the scars of 1,000 repairs and a few ill-advised bar fights from his younger days. He'd been president of Iron Wolves for 11 years, not because he wanted the title, but because someone had to keep this ragtag group from falling apart. The wrench slipped. Jax cursed quietly, wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist. And that's when he noticed her. A small figure in the bright doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, so she was mostly silhouette. For a moment, he thought maybe his eyes were playing tricks. The heat, the glare, too many hours squinting at engine parts. But then she took a step forward, and the shadow became a child. 6 years old, maybe 7. Dark, curly hair pulled back in puffs that had clearly started the day neat, but were now coming undone. Coils sticking to her sweaty forehead. She wore a pink dress with small flowers on it. The kind little girls were to Sunday school, except this one had dirt smudges across the front and a small tear near the hem. In her left hand, she clutched a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. One ear half detached, matted and gray in places. Her feet were bare, That's what Jax noticed next. No shoes, no socks, just small dirty feet on the oil-stained concrete floor. Behind Jax, conversation died. Spike lowered his beer bottle slowly. Doc pushed back from the workbench where he'd been sorting bolts. Shadow looked up from his phone, his usual expression of mild boredom replaced with something sharper. For grown men, suddenly aware that something was very wrong with this picture. The little girl stood there swaying slightly, like she wasn't entirely sure her legs would hold her. Her eyes were huge in her small face, scanning the garage, taking in the motorcycles, the tools, the men who were now all staring at her. She was looking for something or someone. Her chin trembled once, then steadied like she'd made some internal decision to be brave. Jax set down his wrench carefully and wiped his hands on a rag, his mind already racing through possibilities. Lost kid, probably hurt, maybe. But there was something else in her eyes that he recognized from his own childhood, from mirrors in foster homes and school counselors' offices. Fear. Not the kind that comes from being lost or scraped knees, the kind that lives deeper in bones and blood. He took one step toward her, then crouched down so he wouldn't tower over her. None of them knew it yet, but this child's next sentence would change everything they thought they knew about their town. "Hey there," Jax said, his voice rough but gentle. "You okay, little one? If you believe children deserve protection no matter what, stay with this story because what these so-called outlaws did will restore your faith in humanity." The system failed, but these men wouldn't. The little girl's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. She tried again, her voice barely a whisper, so quiet that Jax had to lean forward to hear her. 3 words that made his blood turn cold. "I can't close my legs." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The hum of the oscillating fan in the corner, the distant sound of traffic on Route 47, the birds in the elm tree outside. Everything faded into a terrible, heavy silence. Jax stayed crouched perfectly still while his mind raced to process what he'd just heard. Behind him, he heard Spike's sharp intake of breath, the creak of Doc's boots as he moved closer. Shadow's phone hitting the workbench with a clatter. Without a word, without any signal passing between them, the 3 men formed a half circle around the girl, not crowding her, but creating a wall between her and the open garage door. It was instinct, the same instinct that made wolves circle their young, that made soldiers cover their brothers. Protection. Jax forced his voice to stay calm, steady. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Aisha." She clutched the rabbit tighter. "Aisha Johnson." "Aisha. That's a real pretty name." "I'm Jax. Can you tell me what hurts?" She looked down at her bare feet, then back up at him. Her eyes were the deepest brown, like rich earth after rain, and they held something no 6-year-old's eyes should ever hold. Knowledge. The kind that steals childhood and leaves something broken in its place. "Everything hurts," she whispered. "Down there in my legs and my tummy. It hurts to sit. It hurts to walk. Mama says I'm being dramatic, but I'm not. I'm not dramatic." Jax's jaw tightened. He'd been in combat. He'd seen things that gave him nightmares for years afterward, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of this small child, trembling in her torn Sunday dress, trying to explain pain she shouldn't even have words for. "Can I see where it hurts, Aisha? Just so I know how to help you." His voice was gentle, but inside rage was building like a storm. She nodded slowly and shifted her weight. That's when Jax saw what he'd been dreading. Bruises. Dark purple and yellow marks on the inside of her thighs. Fingerprint-shaped, unmistakable, more bruising around her knees, on her upper arms. Defensive wounds, the kind that come from trying to push someone away. Her dress had hidden most of it, but now, In the harsh fluorescent light of the garage, it was impossible to miss. This wasn't a fall from a bike or roughhousing with other kids. This was deliberate. This was systematic. This was evil. Behind him, Spike turned away, his shoulders rigid. Doc's hands had curled into fists. Shadow was already pulling out his phone again, fingers moving with purpose. Jax swallowed hard. "Aisha, honey, who did this to you?" The little girl's chin trembled again. A single tear tracked down her cheek, cutting through the dust on her face. "Marcus," she said so quietly. He almost didn't hear it. "But I can't tell. He said if I tell, he'll hurt Mama. He says, nobody believes bad girls. He says, I'm bad because I let him, but I didn't let him. I didn't. I tried to say no, but he's so big and I'm little." And her voice broke. The stuffed rabbit fell from her hands as she started to cry. Not loud wailing like kids do when they fall and scrape their knees, but quiet, hiccuping sobs that somehow hurt worse to hear. Jax looked up at his brothers, and in that moment, they all understood. This wasn't about their code or their club or their reputation. This was about a child who'd walked 2 miles on bare feet looking for help because everyone else had failed her. "Aisha," Jax said carefully. "This Marcus, does he have a last name?" She nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Hale. Deputy Marcus Hale. He has a badge and a gun, and Mama says he's a good man who takes care of us. But he's not good. He's not." The name hit Jax like a punch to the gut. Marcus Hale. The same deputy who'd arrested Jax 3 years ago for a bar fight that wasn't even his fault. The same one who'd pulled him over twice last year for expired registration tags that weren't actually expired. The same man who smiled that too white smile at town council meetings and got his picture in the Harlanville Gazette for coaching Little League. Officer of the Year, 2 years running. And now Jax understood why Aisha had come here to a motorcycle club to mend the town called Trouble. Because sometimes the people wearing badges are the real criminals. And sometimes the only ones who will believe you are the ones society has already cast out. Jax reached out slowly, picked up the fallen rabbit, and handed it back to her. "Aisha, listen to me. You are not bad, you're brave, and we're going to help you. I promise." But here's what Jax didn't know. Marcus Hale had done this before. In another county, in another town, to another little girl who'd also tried to tell, and the town had helped him cover it up. Jax pulled out his phone with hands that wanted to shake, but couldn't afford to. Aisha sat on an overturned crate in the corner of the garage, wrapped in Doc's leather jacket. Even though it was 90-degree outside, she was shivering anyway. Shadow had given her a bottle of water and a granola bar from his saddlebag. She hadn't touched either. The Child Protective Services hotline rang 4 times before connecting to an automated menu. Press 1 for English, press 2 for immediate danger, press 3 for general reporting. We'll press 2. The line rang again and again, then transferred. A new voice, bored and mechanical, asked him to describe the situation. He started to explain child sexual abuse needs help now, and got transferred again, then a 4th time. Each new person asking him to repeat the same information, each one sounding less concerned than the last. 45 minutes. That's how long Jax sat on hold. Listening to tinny music interrupted every 30 seconds by a recorded voice assuring him his call was important. 45 minutes while Aisha sat there small and broken, clutching that rabbit. By the time a caseworker finally picked up, Jax's patience had worn through. He gave them the address, the details, everything. The caseworker said someone would come out within 72 hours to conduct an initial assessment. 72 hours? 3 days. Jax looked at Aisha's bruises and knew she didn't have 3 days. He made a decision. "Spike, get the truck. We're taking her to the hospital." Harlanville General Hospital's emergency room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light. A TV in the corner played the news with no sound. Jax carried Aisha in his arms because she said walking hurt too much. The receptionist looked up, saw a man covered in tattoos and motor oil holding a crying child, and her expression went through a rapid calculation. But something in Jax's face must have convinced her this wasn't what it looked like, because she picked up her phone immediately. Dr. Elena Vargas appeared within minutes. She was maybe 50, gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything anymore. She took one look at Aisha, and her whole demeanor shifted into something fierce and protective. Exam room 3, now. Jax started to follow, but Dr. Vargas shook her head. You did the right thing bringing her in, but I need to do this examination without you in the room. Hospital policy, and it's better for evidence collection. She glanced at Aisha, then back to Jax. I'll take care of her. I promise. Jax nodded and stepped back, even though every instinct told him to stay. He'd been on the other side of this once, 37 years ago. Different hospital, different state, but the same fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell. He'd been 8 years old, sitting in a room just like this one, while a doctor with kind eyes examined bruises and burns and asked questions in a gentle voice that made Jax want to tell the truth. Even though his stepfather had promised to kill him if he did, he remembered the fear, the shame, even though the shame wasn't his to carry. The desperate hope that someone, anyone, would believe him and make it stop. Most of all, he remembered the doctor finishing the exam, writing notes in a file, and then watching through the window as that same doctor talked to his stepfather, watched as they shook hands, watched as his stepfather's face shifted from worry to relief, to something darker. And Jax had known, even at 8 years old, that nothing was going to change. That was the day Jax learned that sometimes the system doesn't save you. Sometimes it sends you right back to hell with a smile and a handshake. 40 minutes later, Dr. Vargas emerged from the exam room. Her face was carefully neutral, professional, but Jax saw the tightness around her eyes. She gestured for him to follow her to a quiet corner of the hallway. Sexual abuse, she said quietly. Chronic, ongoing, probably for months, maybe longer. I've collected evidence, documented everything. I'm filing a mandatory report. She paused, glanced back toward the exam room, then leaned closer. This is the 3rd child this year with injuries like this. Similar pattern, similar age. All 3 cases were closed as unsubstantiated. Jax felt ice spread through his chest. What do you mean unsubstantiated? I mean investigated and dismissed. Insufficient evidence, they said. Parents deemed credible. Children deemed unreliable witnesses. The cases never went anywhere. Dr. Vargas's jaw tightened. I documented everything in those cases too. Good documentation, clear evidence. Didn't matter. Before Jax could respond, the emergency room door swung open. Police Chief Harlan Reed walked in, uniform crisp despite the heat, expression already settling into something between concern and irritation. He spotted Jax immediately and his eyes narrowed. Jax knew Harlan Reed. Everyone in Harlanville knew the chief. More importantly, everyone knew that Harlan and Deputy Marcus Hale were best friends. They went fishing together every Sunday after church. Their wives played bunco together on Thursday nights. Their kids had been in the same graduating class. Chief Reed approached with the kind of swagger that comes from 25 years of unchallenged authority in a small town. Jax, heard you brought in a child with some concerns. Mind telling me what this is about? Jax straightened, met his eyes. Aisha Johnson, 6 years old. Sexual abuse. It's not a concern, Chief. It's a fact. Reed's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. That's a serious accusation. Who's she saying did this? Marcus Hale. The silence that followed was heavier than concrete. Dr. Vargas shifted her weight, suddenly very interested in her clipboard. A nurse walking past slowed down, then sped up again. Chief Reed's face rearranged itself into something almost sympathetic. "Look, Jax, I know you mean well, but Marcus Hale is a decorated officer. 6 years on the force, not a single complaint. Officer of the Year. The girl's probably confused. Kids say things. They mix up their dreams with reality. Could have been anyone. Could have been nobody. Could have been something she saw on TV." Jax felt rage rising in his throat like bile. "She's got fingerprint bruises on her thighs. She can barely walk. This isn't confusion." "That's for investigators to determine," Reed said smoothly, "and I'll make sure it's investigated thoroughly. But Jax, maybe stay out of this one. You've got prior history with Marcus. This could look like you've got an agenda." The chief walked away toward the exam room where Aisha waited. Jax watched him go, watched Dr. Vargas's shoulders slump in defeat, and understood with perfect clarity that nothing was going to happen. The system was going to protect its own again. Chief Reed made 2 phone calls after leaving that hospital room. The first was to Marcus. The second, that call would become the smoking gun. The Shady Pines Mobile Home Park sat on the eastern edge of Harlanville, where the town's carefully maintained image started to fray at the edges. The sign at the entrance had lost its H years ago, and nobody had bothered to fix it. Jax's truck rumbled past identical aluminum-sided homes, some well-kept with flower boxes and fresh paint, others sagging under the weight of deferred dreams and empty bank accounts. Aisha sat in the passenger seat, still wrapped in Doc's jacket, staring straight ahead with eyes that looked older than they had an hour ago. Number 47 was third from the end, a single wide with faded blue skirting and a wooden deck that had seen better decades. A rusted swing set stood in the small yard. One swing missing its seat, the other twisted around the top bar like it had given up trying. Jax parked and sat for a moment, trying to figure out what words could possibly make this conversation go the way it needed to go. The front door opened before he could decide. Tanya Johnson stood in the doorway, 29 years old, but carrying the kind of exhaustion that adds a decade to your face. Her dark hair, the same shade as Aisha's, was pulled into a ponytail, her Waffle House uniform still on from the breakfast shift. She worked doubles most days, breakfast and dinner, trying to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Jax could see it in her eyes, the same look he'd seen in mirrors during his own lean years. Desperation, pretending to be dignity. "Who are you?" Her voice was sharp, protective, but underneath it, Jax heard fear. "Name's Jax. I've got your daughter. She came to my garage this afternoon. She's hurt. Ma'am, hurt bad. I took her to the hospital." "And you took my daughter where?" Tanya was down the steps now, moving fast. "You had no right at all. Aisha, get out of that truck right now." Aisha didn't move. She pressed herself against the passenger door like she was trying to disappear into the upholstery. Jax kept his voice level. "Mrs. Johnson, your daughter has been sexually abused. The doctor confirmed it. She told me it was Marcus Hale. She needs protection. She needs—" "Stop!" Tanya's hand came up like she could physically block his words. "Just stop. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but Marcus has been good to us. Better than good. Nobody else wanted a single mom with baggage. Nobody else looked twice at me after Ray died. But Marcus did. He stepped up. He takes care of us. Ma'am, please listen." "No, you listen." Tanya's voice cracked. "Ray put a gun in his mouth 2 years ago, left us with nothing but debt and questions. I was working 3 jobs about to lose this place. Couldn't afford daycare. Marcus helped. He paid off our bills. He watches Aisha when I'm working. He's been a father to her, when her real father chose a bottle and a bullet over his own family." Jax could see it now. The architecture of denial that Tanya had built brick by brick. She couldn't afford to believe him. Believing him meant her judgment had failed, meant she'd chosen wrong, meant she'd let a monster into her home and called him savior. Some truths cost too much to accept. Mrs. Johnson, I understand this is hard. But my daughter has an imagination. She watches too much TV. She gets confused. Tanya was crying now, but her voice stayed hard. You people are just trying to cause trouble. Marcus warned me this might happen. He said Iron Wolves has been harassing him for years. Said, you tried to turn people against him because he arrested some of you. This is revenge, isn't it? Jax felt something inside him break. Not anger anymore. Something worse. Futility. Look at her bruises, look at her. She can barely walk. She fell off her bike last week. Kids fall, kids get bruises. These aren't bike bruises. Tanya's face hardened into something desperate and ugly. You're poisoning her mind. You're putting ideas in her head. Aisha, baby, did this man tell you to say things about Marcus? Did he tell you to lie? From inside the truck, so quiet. Jax almost didn't hear it. Aisha whispered, I'm not lying, Mama. Get out of that truck. Now! Aisha started to cry, clutching the door handle. Please, Mama, please don't make me. He hurts me. He hurts me so much. Tanya yanked the truck door open, reached in, grabbed her daughter's arm. Aisha screamed, a sound that would haunt Jax for the rest of his life. She wrapped her arms around Jax's leg, holding on with everything she had. Please, Aisha sobbed. Please don't leave me. Please, I'll be good. I'll be so good. Just don't leave me with him. Jax looked down at this tiny child, clinging to him like he was her last hope, then up at her mother, who couldn't see past her own survival and felt a helplessness so complete it was like drowning. He had no legal right to this child. He wasn't family. He had no authority. And if he tried to keep her, he'd be the criminal, not Marcus Hale. Tanya pried Aisha's fingers loose one by one. You're making this worse. Let go right now. Jax forced himself to release Aisha, even though every cell in his body screamed to hold on. He watched Tanya half carry, half drag her daughter toward the trailer. Watched Aisha reach back toward him, her face twisted in terror and betrayal. Watched the screen door slam shut. And then he saw the patrol car pulling up, white and blue, Harlanville Police Department emblazoned on the side. Marcus Hale stepped out, all 6'2" of him, uniform perfectly pressed, that smile already in place. He raised one hand in a friendly wave, like Jax was a neighbor, like they were buddies. Marcus walked past Jax's truck close enough that Jax could smell his cologne. Appreciate you bringing Aisha home, he said pleasantly. Kids wander off sometimes, don't they? Good thing there are concerned citizens around. You have yourself a good evening now, Jax. He disappeared inside the trailer. Through the window, Jax could see Aisha backing away, could see Marcus's hand on her shoulder, firm and possessive. Jax sat in his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. His whole body shook with rage and helplessness, and something darker. He'd failed. The system had failed. And tomorrow, Marcus would take Aisha somewhere Jax couldn't follow, destroy whatever evidence remained, and continue doing what he'd been doing, unless someone stopped him. Jax started his engine and drove away, but his mind was already moving in a different direction. He had 72 hours, maybe less, before Marcus could destroy evidence and move Aisha out of state. So he did something that could send him to prison for life. He called the only people more dangerous than cops, other survivors. By 9:00 that night, every member of Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club sat around the scarred wooden table in the back room of their clubhouse. When bikers call an emergency meeting, they call it church. And church was now in session. 8 men total, ranging from Shadow at 26 to Doc at 53. All of them understanding that what happened in this room would determine whether a 6-year-old girl lived or died by inches. In that trailer, Jack stood at the head of the table, still wearing the same grease-stained shirt from that afternoon, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 hours. We all know what we saw. We all know what the hospital confirmed, and we all saw how the system responded. He paused, looking each man in the eye. I'm not asking any of you to do anything illegal, but I'm also not walking away from this. So if you want out, now's the time. No judgment, no hard feelings. Nobody moved. Spike cracked his knuckles. Doc leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Shadow was already opening his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard before Jax even finished speaking. All right then, Jack said quietly. Shadow, what can you find? Shadow was the youngest member of Iron Wolves, baby-faced and soft-spoken, the kind of guy who looked like he'd get lost in a library and be perfectly happy about it. What most people didn't know was that before Shadow washed out of the NSA over a disagreement about domestic surveillance protocols, he'd been one of their best analysts. He knew his way around databases and firewalls the way other men knew their way around engine blocks. His fingers moved with practiced precision, opening windows, running searches, pulling threads that most people didn't even know existed. Marcus James Hale, age 34, Harlanville Police Department for 3 years. Before that, Riverside County Sheriff's Department. Shadow paused, squinting at his screen. That's interesting. What's interesting? Jax leaned forward. His employment records in Riverside County end abruptly. No explanation. Just transferred to Harlanville 3 months later. Shadow opened another window. Let me check their incident reports, see if there's anything tied to his name. The room fell silent, except for the clicking of keys and the low hum of the laptop's fan. Minutes passed. Shadow's expression shifted from concentration to something darker. Found it. Sealed file, but not sealed well enough. 3 years ago, complaint filed against Deputy Marcus Hale by a woman named Jennifer Hastings. Allegation of sexual abuse of her 12-year-old daughter, Kayla. Investigation opened by Internal Affairs. Shadow scrolled down, his jaw tightening. Investigation closed 2 weeks later. Insufficient evidence. Files marked for destruction. Records indicate they were lost in a server migration 6 months ago. Lost, Spike said, his voice flat. How convenient. Shadow kept digging, pulling up social services records, cross-referencing names and dates. A pattern began to emerge, clear as fingerprints on glass. Marcus Hale targeted single mothers, women who were vulnerable, isolated, desperate, women who needed help so badly they'd overlook warning signs, women who couldn't afford to lose their lifeline, even if that lifeline was slowly destroying their children. 3 documented cases in Riverside County, all closed as unsubstantiated. 2 complaints that never made it past the initial report. One mother who withdrew her allegations after her car was mysteriously vandalized, and her employer received an anonymous tip about drug use that cost her the job. He's got a system, Shadow said quietly. He picks victims who won't be believed. Kids from broken homes, mothers with histories, with bad credit, with ex-husbands who bailed. He positions himself as the good guy, the rescuer, makes himself indispensable. By the time the abuse starts, these women are so dependent on him, they can't see what's right in front of them. And if anyone tries to report, he's got the badge and the reputation to make the complaints disappear. Doc, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. How many kids are we talking about? Shadow's fingers stilled on the keyboard. In Riverside, 5 confirmed victims. Could be more. Here in Harlanville, Dr. Vargas mentioned 3 cases this year with similar injuries, all closed as unsubstantiated. At Aisha, that's 4, plus, however many never reported at all. The weight of that number settled over the room like a physical thing. 9 children, maybe more. 9 childhoods destroyed while a system designed to protect them looked the other way because the predator wore a badge. Jax's hands curled into fists on the table. Can you pull his transfer records? Find out who approved moving him to Harlanville. Who signed off on hiring him despite these complaints? Already on it, Shadow muttered. He opened another series of windows, pulled up personnel files, authorization forms. Transfer request approved by Riverside County Sheriff Marcus Webb. Letter of recommendation signed by the same Harlanville Police Chief Harlan Reed hired him based on that recommendation. They're fishing buddies now, by the way. Have been since 6 months after Marcus arrived. So Reed knew, Spike said. Had to know. Maybe, maybe not. But he definitely knows now, and he's choosing to protect Marcus anyway. Shadow leaned back, rubbing his eyes. I can get you evidence. I can document the pattern. But here's the problem. Everything I just found, I found by going places I'm not supposed to go. None of this would be admissible in court. We use it, and Marcus walks while I go to prison for hacking government systems. The room went quiet again. They all understood the impossible math. They had proof, but proof they couldn't use. They had truth, but truth the system wouldn't accept. Jax looked around the table at these men, his brothers, every one of them carrying their own scars from their own wars. So, we find evidence they can't ignore. Evidence so clean, so undeniable that even a corrupt system can't bury it. He paused. I need a vote. This goes wrong. We all go down. It goes right. We might save that little girl and God knows how many others. But either way, there's no going back after this. One by one, hands went up. All 8. Unanimous. Then we finish this, Jax said. Legal or not. Shadow kept typing, his face illuminated by the pale glow of his screen. He'd found something else in those sealed files buried deeper than the rest. A name that would make this case explode beyond Harlanville, that would reveal connections reaching higher than any of them imagined. But first, they needed evidence the system couldn't ignore. Evidence that would force even the most corrupt officials to act. And Jax had an idea of how to get it. For 72 hours, someone from Iron Wolves watched the Johnson trailer. They worked in shifts, 2 men at a time, parked in different locations to avoid suspicion. Shadow sat in a pickup truck 3 lots down, laptop balanced on his knees, monitoring traffic patterns and police scanners. Spike took position in an abandoned trailer across the street, the one with the foreclosure notice yellowing in the window. Jax and Doc rotated through, sleeping in 2-hour bursts, living on gas station coffee and cold sandwiches. They watched Tanya leave for her shifts at the Waffle House, watched neighbors come and go, watched Marcus's patrol car pull up twice on official visits, staying for 15-20 minutes at a time. They documented everything. Times, dates, vehicle descriptions, who came, who left, how long they stayed, building a timeline that might mean nothing in court, but meant everything to them. Day 3, Tuesday afternoon, Marcus arrived in his personal vehicle. No uniform this time, just jeans and a polo shirt, looking like any other boyfriend stopping by. Tanya's car was in the driveway. Through binoculars, Jax watched Marcus on the front porch talking to Tanya. Watched her nod, grab her purse, head to her car. She pulled out and drove toward town, probably sent on some errand, some convenient excuse to get her out of the house. Marcus went inside. The door closed. Through the window, Jax could see Aisha sitting on the couch, still in her pajamas, even though it was past 3 He saw Marcus's shadow move across the living room, saw him stop in front of Aisha, saw the shadow lean down. Jax's hand was on the door handle before he even realized he'd moved. Every muscle in his body screamed to cross that street, kick down that door, and pull Marcus Hale apart piece by piece. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. His breath came fast and shallow. Doc's hand clamped down on his shoulder. Not yet. We lose our heads. We lose everything. He's in there with her right now. I know, but if we go in there, We've got nothing that holds up. We're just bikers breaking into someone's home. Marcus spins it as harassment, as stalking. Aisha gets sent back to him anyway, and we're in jail where we can't help her at all. Jax knew Doc was right, hated that he was right, but knowing and accepting were two different things. He watched Marcus's shadow move toward the back of the trailer, toward where the bedrooms would be. Watched Aisha's small silhouette follow. Slow, reluctant. "We need better eyes," Doc said quietly. He reached into his bag and pulled out equipment that looked military-grade because it was. Telephoto lens camera, the kind Army Rangers used for reconnaissance missions in places the government pretended they'd never been. Doc had been in those places. He'd seen things, and done things that woke him up at 3 a.m, sweating and reaching for weapons that weren't there anymore. He set up the camera in the window of the abandoned trailer, adjusting the angle until he had a clear line of sight into Aisha's bedroom window. The blinds were open. Marcus probably didn't think anyone was watching. Why would he? He'd gotten away with this for years. Through the telephoto lens, everything became crystal clear. Marcus entering Aisha's room. The bedroom door closing behind him. 18 minutes. Jax counted every single second of those 18 minutes. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. 18 minutes that felt like 18 hours. When Marcus emerged, he was adjusting his belt. He walked back through the living room, paused at the refrigerator, grabbed a beer like he lived there, like he had every right. He sat on the couch, turned on the television, completely relaxed. Doc kept the camera rolling. Through Aisha's window, they could see her on her bed. She'd curled into a ball, arms wrapped around that stuffed rabbit, rocking slightly. The kind of rocking that happens when your body is trying to self-soothe but nothing helps. When you're 6 years old and the person who's supposed to protect you sent your protector away, and the monster came back. Jax turned away from the window, pressed his forehead against the wall, tried to breathe through the rage. Behind him, he heard the steady click of Doc's camera capturing frame after frame after frame. 20 minutes later, Tanya's car pulled back into the driveway. She went inside carrying grocery bags. Through the binoculars, Jax watched her smile at Marcus. Watched Marcus stand and kiss her cheek. The picture of domestic normalcy. Watched Tanya call towards the bedrooms, probably telling Aisha dinner would be ready soon. Watched Aisha emerge face blank and sit at the table like nothing had happened, because this was her normal now. This was just Tuesday. Spike sat in the corner of the abandoned trailer, silent, his face carved from stone. He was remembering his own daughter at 14. The way she'd gotten quiet and withdrawn after his ex-wife's boyfriend moved in. Remembering the bruises she'd explained away. Remembering the night she'd finally told him, and he'd beaten that boyfriend within an inch of his life and ended up in county jail for aggravated assault. By the time he got out, his daughter wouldn't speak to him. His ex-wife had a restraining order and the boyfriend had moved 2 states away. His daughter was 24 now, living in Portland, doing well. They talked once a month, maybe. Their relationship had never fully recovered from that time when he tried to protect her, and ended up making everything worse. He'd failed her by waiting too long, then failed her again by acting too fast. There was no right way to do this. There was only the way that maybe possibly kept the victim safe and got the monster off the streets. This time had to be different. This time they had to be smarter. Jax watched Marcus leave an hour later. Watched him wave to Tanya from his truck like they were some kind of happy family. Watched him drive away with that same smile Jax had seen outside the trailer. The smile that said, "I can do whatever I want, and nobody can stop me." Doc reviewed the footage on the camera's small screen, his expression grim. We've got him entering the room. We've got timestamps. We've got Aisha's distress after. If we turn this over to the right people, it won't be enough. Jax interrupted. You know it won't be. Defense says it's circumstantial. Says Marcus was just checking on her. Maybe reading her a bedtime story. Maybe she was upset about something else. Says we're stalkers with an agenda, that the footage is edited, that we can't prove what happened behind that closed door. He turned to face Doc. That footage would have been enough. Should have been enough. But Jax knew the system. He needed something even the most corrupt cop couldn't explain away, so he set a trap. Shadow made the call from a burner phone in a Walmart parking lot, 30 miles outside Harlanville. The Texas State Attorney General's office had a hotline for reporting government corruption. He'd rehearsed the script 3 times before dialing, keeping his voice neutral, factual, giving them just enough to trigger an investigation without revealing who he was or how he knew. I have information about child abuse cases being systematically buried by the Harlanville Police Department. Multiple victims. Pattern of behavior. Officer involved is Deputy Marcus Hale. Chief Harlan Reed has been closing cases as unsubstantiated despite medical evidence. I believe there's financial motivation. He paused. Check the bank records. Follow the money. He hung up before they could trace the call, pulled the battery out of the phone, and drove away. It wasn't much, but it was a seed planted in soil that might actually let it grow. 3 days later, Detective Lauren Wu arrived in Harlanville driving an unmarked sedan with state plates. She was 36, FBI task force on crimes against children on loan to the state AG's office for a multi-jurisdictional investigation. She'd seen enough child abuse cases to know the patterns to recognize when local authorities were protecting predators instead of children. The anonymous tip had landed on her desk, flagged as priority, because it matched intelligence they'd already been gathering. She came to Harlanville expecting resistance. She came prepared to fight. Iron Wolves had been watching for her. Shadow had monitored communications, caught wind of the state sending someone, found her name and her credentials. Former NYPD, specialized training in forensic interviewing, reputation for not backing down. If anyone could cut through Harlanville's wall of silence, it was her. He arranged a chance meeting at Riverside Park, the small playground near the elementary school. Tanya brought Aisha there most Wednesday afternoons, when she had a split shift, letting her daughter play for an hour of supervised freedom before heading home. Jax made sure Detective Wu happened to be there, sitting on a bench with her phone, looking like any other person enjoying the spring weather. He'd coached Aisha the day before at the grocery store when she and Tanya were shopping. 60 seconds of whispered conversation, while Tanya was 3 aisles over comparing cereal prices. There's going to be a woman at the park tomorrow. Dark hair, professional clothes. If she talks to you, if she asks you questions, you can tell her the truth. She's safe. She'll believe you. But only if she asks. Okay. Only tell if someone official asks. Aisha had nodded, eyes wide and frightened and desperately hopeful. Now Jax sat in his truck 2 blocks away, monitoring through binoculars. He watched Detective Wu approach the playground, watched her smile at Aisha, ask casual questions. What's your name? Do you come here often? That's a pretty dress? Simple, non-threatening, building rapport the way trained investigators do. Watched Tanya glance up from her phone, assess the situation, decide it was harmless. What Tanya didn't see was the small audio recorder in Detective Wu's jacket pocket, the kind that would hold up in court because it was legal in Texas to record conversations in public spaces. What she didn't see was Jax's hand on his own recording device, backing up every word in case something went wrong. Detective Wu asked the right questions, gentle, open-ended, giving Aisha space to tell her story in her own words. And Aisha, probably sensing this was her last chance, told her everything. Jax couldn't hear the words from 2 blocks away, but he could see Detective Wu's body language change, could see her posture straighten, her expression shift from friendly interest to focused intensity, could see the moment she understood exactly what she was dealing with. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, Detective Wu gave Aisha her card, told her she was brave, told her she'd be in touch, She walked back to her car with the kind of controlled urgency that comes from years of dealing with emergencies without panicking. Jack started his engine, planning to follow at a distance, but before he could pull out, he saw Marcus's truck coming from the opposite direction. Marcus had been driving past the park patrol route, or just checking up, Jax couldn't be sure, and he'd spotted the state plates on Detective Wu's sedan, spotted her talking to Tanya, who was now animated, probably mentioning the nice woman who'd chatted with Aisha. Jax watched Marcus's expression change, watched recognition and calculation cross his face. He knew what state investigators looked like. He knew why they came to small towns. Traffic lights seemed designed to torment Jax that day. He pulled up behind Marcus's truck at the intersection of Main and 5th, close enough to see the back of Marcus's head to see him glance in his rearview mirror and recognize Jax's truck. Marcus pulled into the turning lane. Jax had no choice but to follow his route. They ended up side by side at the red light. Marcus rolled down his window. Jax's hand tightened on his steering wheel, but he rolled his window down too. "Jax." Marcus's voice was friendly, conversational, the same tone he'd use ordering coffee. "Funny running into you. Been seeing you around town a lot lately, almost like you're following someone. Free country. I can drive where I want." Sure, that's true. It's also true that stalking is a crime. Harassment is a crime. You keep showing up places my family is. People might start to wonder about your intentions." Marcus's smile never wavered. "Tanya mentions some state investigator was talking to Aisha at the park. Weird coincidence, right? State shows up just after you start sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Jax met his eyes in the mirror. "Maybe they showed up because they heard about a deputy who likes little girls." The smile finally dropped. Marcus's face went cold and hard. "You're messing with the wrong family, Jax. You think you know something, but you don't know anything. You think anyone's going to believe a bunch of criminals over a decorated police officer? You think that state investigator is going to find anything? Because I promise you, she won't." "And you," Marcus leaned closer to his window. "Accidents happen to bikers all the time. Motorcycle crashes, equipment failures. Would be a shame if your brakes went out on Route 47. All those curves, no guardrails." The light turned green. Marcus drove away, taking his time. Not a care in the world. Jax's hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the effort of not turning around and following Marcus, not finishing this the way his rage wanted him to finish it. He pulled into a parking lot, sat there trying to breathe, and that's when Detective Wu's car pulled up beside him. She got out, walked to his window. Her expression was all business. "You're Jax, the one who brought Aisha Johnson to the hospital. I've read the reports, including the one that got buried." She glanced around, making sure they were alone. "Get in my car. We need to talk." 5 minutes later, sitting in her passenger seat with the windows up and the AC running, Detective Wu turned to face him. Marcus Hale isn't his real name. He's Marcus Anthony Russo, dishonorably discharged Marine. Changed his name legally 7 years ago. He's been flagged by the FBI for 15 months. We've been trying to build a federal case. Interstate trafficking, pattern of abuse across state lines, potential connections to other offenders. But every time we got close, local police obstructed. Reports disappeared. Witnesses recanted. Evidence went missing. She paused, studying Jax's face. "You just gave us our way in. That recording of Aisha, that's a federal victim statement. Combined with what we already have, we can move forward. But I need your help. I need everything you've got. Surveillance footage, documentation, anything. And I need you to trust the system one more time." Jax laughed, bitter and sharp. "The system failed that little girl at every turn. I know. I've seen it fail 100 kids. But I'm not Harlanville PD. I'm not protecting anyone. And if what I suspect is true, if Marcus is part of something bigger, we're not just talking about one predator. We're talking about a network." She pulled out a folder, showed him photographs. Different children, different states, similar patterns of abuse. We think there are others, other cops, other authority figures, sharing victims, sharing methods. Marcus might be the thread that unravels the whole thing. But we need him alive, Jax. We need him to talk. So I need you to promise me you won't do anything that lets him walk on a technicality. Jax stared at those photographs, at faces that looked like Aisha's, scared, damaged, forgotten by everyone who should have protected them. He thought he was saving one child, but he'd actually stumbled into something far bigger, something darker than he'd imagined, a network that would shock the nation. Small towns have their own circulatory systems, arteries of gossip that pump information faster than any internet connection. By Thursday morning, everyone in Harlanville had heard some version of the story. The bikers from Iron Wolves were harassing Deputy Hale. Or maybe they were heroes exposing abuse. Or maybe they were criminals with a vendetta making up lies about a good man. The truth depended entirely on who was telling it. The Harlanville Community Forum, a Facebook group with 3,000 members, exploded overnight. Someone posted a vague reference to concerning allegations, and within hours the comment section had become a battlefield. Team Back the Blue posted photos of Marcus at the 4th of July parade. Marcus coaching Little League. Marcus helping elderly Mrs. Henderson change her tire in the church parking lot. See, good man, family man, hero in uniform. The accusations were obviously false, obviously motivated by criminals trying to discredit law enforcement. Team Protect the Child fired back with statistics about abuse, about how predators hide in plain sight, about how badges don't make someone trustworthy. They shared articles about other cops arrested for similar crimes, other communities that had defended monsters until the evidence became undeniable. They demanded investigation, transparency, accountability. The moderators tried to keep up, deleting the most inflammatory comments, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a paper cup. By Friday, the group had split into two distinct camps, and the division was spreading through town like a crack through ice. Jax felt it everywhere he went. Friday afternoon, he stopped at Murphy's Auto Supply for spark plugs. Randy Murphy, who'd been selling him parts for 6 years, looked up from the register with an expression Jax had never seen before. Cold. Closed. "We don't serve your kind anymore," Randy said flatly. "My kind? People who go after good cops? People who spread lies? You and your club need to find somewhere else to shop." Jax set the spark plugs on the counter and walked out. Down the street at the diner, the waitress, who usually gave him extra coffee and smiled when she brought his pie, wouldn't make eye contact. At the post office, people moved away from him in line, like his presence was contaminating. Saturday morning, Jax came out to find his motorcycle on its side in the parking lot. Deep scratches carved into the tank. Someone had keyed "liar" into the paint. Spike's bike got sugar in the gas tank. Shadow found his truck's tires slashed. The clubhouse windows got spray-painted with blue lines, and the words, "Blue Lives Matter, Bikers Don't." The message was clear. Choose the cop. Choose order. Choose the narrative that lets everyone sleep at night believing their town is safe and their heroes are real. But some people chose differently. Jax was pumping gas at the Chevron station Sunday afternoon when an elderly woman approached. She had to be 75, maybe 80, moving slowly with a cane, her church clothes indicating she'd just come from the 11 service. She looked around carefully, making sure no one was watching, then leaned close to Jax. Her voice was barely a whisper. "My granddaughter told me something about Marcus Hale 2 years ago. She was 9. She said he touched her inappropriately at the police department's youth outreach event. I told her she must have misunderstood. I told her Marcus was a nice man, that she shouldn't say things like that." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't believe her. I chose his reputation over her truth. She doesn't talk to me anymore. Moved away as soon as she turned 18. She reached out, touched Jax's arm with a trembling hand. Thank you for believing. Thank you for not looking away. She walked back to her car before Jax could respond. Before he could tell her that her granddaughter's courage might be what finally brings Marcus down. That it's never too late to believe someone who needs you to believe them. That same afternoon, at Harlanville Community Church, Pastor Richard Drummond delivered a sermon that would be quoted in local papers for weeks. His voice rang through the sanctuary, righteous and certain. We live in troubling times, brothers and sisters. Times when lawlessness is celebrated. Times when good men who dedicate their lives to protecting us are torn down by rumors and lies. I'm talking about the scourge of vigilante motorcycle gangs spreading poison through our community, targeting one of our finest citizens because he had the courage to arrest them for their crimes. The congregation murmured agreement. Deputy Marcus Hale is a godly man, a man who serves, a man who gives his time and resources to help the vulnerable. And what does he get in return? Persecution, false witness, character assassination by criminals who know they can manipulate the naive and the gullible. In the third row, 3 families who'd known Marcus for years nodded along. In the back row, a young mother held her daughter close and wondered if she should have listened when her child said Marcus made her uncomfortable. At Vacation Bible School last summer, the town was tearing itself apart. Everyone so busy defending their version of truth that nobody noticed the actual truth slipping away. Nobody noticed that Marcus Hale had stopped showing up for his shifts, that his house lights stayed off after dark, that his truck was parked at odd hours in places it shouldn't be. But while Harlanville argued about reputation and loyalty and who to believe, Marcus was planning his escape. He'd done this before. 3 years ago in Riverside County, when the allegations got too close, when investigators started asking questions he couldn't answer, he disappeared for 6 weeks. Changed his name, changed his story, found a new town that needed a hero. He knew exactly how to vanish, how to erase digital trails, how to create new identities, and this time he wouldn't leave empty-handed. This time he'd take Aisha with him. He'd been grooming Tanya for this possibility since day one, positioning himself as the only stable thing in her chaotic life, making her dependent, making her complicit. When he told her they needed to leave town for a while, that the bikers were dangerous, that Aisha would be safer somewhere else, Tanya would agree. She always agreed. And by the time anyone realized what had happened, they'd be gone. If you believe truth matters more than reputation, hit that subscribe button because this story proves that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand alone. Don't let this message get buried. Monday morning, day 8, Tanya Johnson walked into the Harlanville County Courthouse with Marcus Hale at her side. She filed for an emergency restraining order against every member of Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, citing harassment, stalking, and threats to her family's safety. The petition claimed the bikers had been following her, intimidating her daughter, and spreading malicious lies designed to destroy her relationship and her peace of mind. Judge Franklin Carter, who'd known Marcus Hale for 5 years and played golf with Chief Reed every other Saturday, granted the order immediately. No hearing required. Emergency circumstances. Iron Wolves MC members were prohibited from coming within 500 FT of the Johnson residence, Tanya's workplace, or Aisha's school. Violation would result in immediate arrest and jail time pending trial. Jax got the notification at 2:30 that afternoon. Delivered by a deputy who wasn't Marcus, a young kid who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. 500 fot, the distance of less than 2 football fields. The distance that meant they couldn't watch, couldn't document, couldn't protect. Shadow pulled up a map, measured the radius. Their surveillance positions were all inside the restricted zone. The abandoned trailer, the parking spots they'd been using. Even driving past on the main road would technically be a violation if they could prove intent. "We're done," Spike said, staring at the paperwork. "He won. He maneuvered us right off the board. Jax didn't answer. He was thinking about Aisha, about what would happen now that the only people watching were gone, about how predators operate when they think no one's looking. That night, the temperature dropped and storm clouds rolled in from the west. Jax sat in the clubhouse at 11:15, monitoring the police scanner like he'd been doing every night since this started. The scanner crackled with routine traffic. Domestic disturbance on Oak Street. Possible DUI on Route 47. Nothing from the Johnson address. Then, at 11:47, a call came through. Not on the scanner. Those were the official dispatches. This came through Shadow's equipment, the system he'd quietly hacked into that let them monitor the raw 911 calls before they were filtered and assigned. A small voice, terrified and desperate. "Please help me. He's hurting me again. It hurts so bad. Please." The biker said to call this number if I needed help. Please send someone. Aisha's voice, 6 years old and calling 911, while Marcus Hale did unspeakable things in the next room. The dispatcher's voice came through, calm and professional. "Okay, sweetheart. What's your address?" Aisha gave it, her words interrupted by crying, by sharp intakes of breath that sounded like pain. "And what's the emergency?" "Marcus, he's hurting me. He won't stop. Please make him stop." There was a pause, then the dispatcher's voice again. Different now. Less professional, more familiar. "Is this Aisha Johnson? Honey, it's Miss Deborah. You know me. Are you having bad dreams again?" "No, I'm not dreaming. He's really hurting me. Please. Where's your mama?" "At work. She's always at work when he comes over. Please send someone." Another pause. Jax could hear typing in the background then. "Okay, honey. I'm going to send someone to check on you, but I need you to calm down. Okay, you're going to be fine. Marcus is a police officer. He helps people. He wouldn't hurt you. You're probably just confused. Why don't you go back to bed?" "Please don't tell him I called. He said he'd hurt Mama if I told." "Nobody's going to hurt anyone, sweetie. You just had a nightmare. Try to get some sleep." The call ended. Jax stared at the equipment, waiting for the dispatch to go out, waiting for units to be sent to the Johnson residence for a welfare check. He waited 5 minutes, 10, 15, nothing. Shadow pulled up the dispatch logs. The call had been marked as non-emergency. Possible prank. No action required. The dispatcher's name was listed. Deborah Chun. Shadow ran a quick search. Deborah Chun, age 41, 911 dispatcher for 6 years. Facebook friends with Marcus Hale. Photos of them at the same family barbecues. Comments on each other's posts. Jack stood up so fast his chair fell over. "She buried it. She marked it as a prank and buried it." "We can't go there," Doc said, but his voice lacked conviction. The restraining order. "We go there, we're done. We lose everything. She called for help and nobody's coming." Jax was already grabbing his jacket. "That little girl is alone in that house with that monster right now and nobody's coming." Spike stood. Shadow closed his laptop. Doc picked up his keys. They all knew what this meant. They all knew they were crossing a line they couldn't uncross. But the alternative, leaving Aisha alone while Marcus hurt her, wasn't something any of them could live with. At 3:47 in the morning, 3 motorcycles cut through the darkness toward the Johnson trailer. They parked 2 blocks away, approached on foot. The trailer was dark except for the flickering blue light of a television through the living room window. Jax, Spike, and Shadow moved around to the back where the chain-link fence separated the property from an empty lot overgrown with weeds. Jax cut the fence with wire cutters. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. They waited, frozen, listening. No response from inside the trailer. They crossed the backyard. Jax tried the back door, locked, but the window to the bathroom was cracked open, probably for ventilation. It was small, barely big enough for Shadow, who was the leanest of them. He climbed through, disappeared inside. 30 seconds later, the back door opened from the inside. Shadow's face was pale. "Bathroom door's locked from the outside. She's in there." They moved fast. Jax reached the bathroom door, saw the hook and eye lock that had been installed on the outside. The kind of lock you put on a shed, not a bathroom. Not unless you're locking someone in. He flipped the lock, opened the door. Aisha sat on the bathroom floor in her nightgown, pressed into the corner between the toilet and the wall. Blood streaked her legs. Her face was swollen from crying. When she saw Jax, something between hope and terror crossed her features. "You came," she whispered. "Miss Deborah said nobody would come." Jax knelt down, made himself small, non-threatening. "We came. We're getting you out of here." "Mama's going to be so mad. Marcus said, if anyone finds out, he'll make Mama lose her job. We'll be homeless. It'll be my fault." "None of this is your fault. Not one single bit." Jax held out his hand. "Do you trust me?" Aisha looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she reached out and took it. They moved through the trailer like ghosts. In the living room, Marcus Hale lay on the couch, still in his clothes, one arm hanging off the side. An empty bourbon bottle sat on the coffee table. He was snoring deep and regular. Jax had 30 seconds to make a choice. Take Aisha and become a kidnapper, a felon, a man who'd spend the rest of his life in prison, or leave her here and stay law-abiding while she died by inches, while her childhood was systematically destroyed, while the system continued to fail her. What he did next would either save his soul or destroy his life. Probably both. He wrapped Aisha in his leather jacket, lifted her into his arms, walked past Marcus's sleeping form. The floor creaked under his weight. Marcus stirred, mumbled something incoherent. Jax froze, but Marcus just rolled over and kept sleeping, too drunk to register the danger. Standing 6 FT away, they made it outside. Jax carried Aisha to his motorcycle, set her in front of him on the seat. The engine roar shattered the 3:00 a.m. silence. Inside the trailer, lights came on. The front door burst open. Marcus Hale stood in the doorway, no longer drunk, no longer sleeping. His face was a mask of rage and something else. Fear. The fear of a predator who realizes his prey is escaping. Jax met his eyes across the distance. "Come after us. I dare you." He gunned the engine and rode toward the state line with Aisha pressed against his chest, her small arms wrapped around his waist. While behind them, Marcus Hale reached for his phone to call in every cop in 3 counties. Jax knew what came next: manhunt, arrest, federal charges. But for the first time in 8 days, Aisha was out of that trailer. And whatever happened next, that was worth it. The manhunt lasted 11 hours. But what investigators found while searching for Jax would blow the case wide open and reveal Marcus's darkest secret. Jax had made the call from a rest stop 15 miles outside Harlanville, while Aisha slept against his chest, exhausted from fear and pain and the adrenaline crash that follows survival. Detective Lauren Wu answered on the second ring. He told her everything in 2 minutes flat. The 911 call, the dispatcher burying it, finding Aisha locked in the bathroom. Marcus passed out drunk. He told her he was bringing Aisha in, that he knew what it meant, that he didn't care. "Meet me at the Texas City field office," Detective Wu said. "Don't stop anywhere else. Don't talk to anyone else." And Jax, "You did the right thing." The FBI field office sat downtown, a gray concrete building that looked like every other federal building in America, designed to project authority without personality. Jax pulled into the parking garage at 6:43 in the morning. Aisha still wrapped in his jacket, her head resting against his shoulder. Detective Wu was waiting with 2 other agents and a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as a forensic interviewer specialized in child trauma. They took Aisha gently, speaking in soft voices, promising her she was safe now. She looked back at Jax as they led her inside, her eyes asking the question she was too scared to voice. "Are you leaving me too?" "I'll be right here," Jax told her. "I promise." 2 agents stepped forward then, and Jax knew what came next. He put his hands behind his back without being asked. The handcuffs clicked into place, cold metal against his wrists. He was read his rights: kidnapping, custodial interference, violation of a restraining order, possible additional charges pending investigation. Each word was technically accurate. Each word meant years in federal prison. But Aisha was safe, and that was the only math that mattered. While Jax sat in a holding cell, Aisha underwent a forensic interview conducted by specialists trained to extract truth without re-traumatizing victims. The interview room was designed to look comfortable, unthreatening, soft furniture, neutral colors, toys available if needed. 2 cameras recorded from different angles, creating a record that would be admissible in any court in the country. The interviewer, whose name was Dr. Sarah Hoffman, had conducted over 300 of these interviews. She'd heard stories that gave her nightmares, seen children who'd been broken in ways that shouldn't be possible. But Aisha's testimony, delivered in that small, halting voice, was comprehensive and devastating. She described abuse that had started 6 months after Marcus moved in with them. She described being told it was normal, that all little girls did this with their daddies, that she was special. She described the threats, what would happen to her mother if she told what would happen to her if she didn't cooperate. She described the pain, the fear, the confusion of being 6 years old and knowing something was terribly wrong, but having no power to stop it. Dr. Hoffman documented everything, every detail, every pattern, every piece of evidence that would later form the foundation of a case so airtight that even the best defense attorneys in the country couldn't find a crack. At 7:35 that morning, while Aisha was still being interviewed, FBI agents executed simultaneous raids on 3 locations: Marcus Hale's residence, Harlanville Police Department headquarters, and Chief Harlan Reed's home office. Marcus's house looked normal from the outside. A small ranch-style home on Maple Street with a well-maintained lawn and an American flag hanging from the porch. Inside, it was staged like a showroom. Everything clean, everything in place, everything projecting the image of a responsible, trustworthy man. But the FBI's forensic team wasn't interested in appearances. They were looking for what people hide. They found it in the basement behind a locked door that Marcus had told his neighbors was for storage. External hard drives, 7 of them, each with terabytes of data, thousands of images, hours of video, multiple children, different ages, spanning 8 years. Some files were professionally produced, traded on dark web forums. Others were homemade, recorded in locations the team would later identify as Marcus's previous residences, hotel rooms, and the Johnson trailer. The hidden camera footage from Aisha's bedroom was particularly damning. Marcus had installed a small camera disguised as a smoke detector positioned to capture everything. The footage confirmed every detail Aisha had described, time-stamped and irrefutable. No defense attorney could claim she was confused or lying. The evidence was digital, documented, undeniable. At Harlanville Police Department, agents seized servers and file cabinets, collecting every report, every complaint, every case that had crossed Chief Reed's desk in the past 5 years. They found the pattern immediately. 14 reports of suspected child abuse, all involving similar descriptions, all closed as unsubstantiated, all closed by Chief Reed personally. At Reed's home, forensic accountants found the money. Bank records showing regular deposits from an offshore account linked to Marcus Hale. $127,000 over 3 years. Payments that coincided with cases being closed, evidence disappearing, reports being marked as unfounded. Reed had been selling protection, selling silence, selling children's safety for cash that paid for his boat, his fishing cabin, his daughter's college tuition. The horror of it settled over the investigation team like a physical weight. This wasn't one bad cop and one corrupt chief. This was systematic. This was organized. This was a network designed to protect predators and silence victims. But the real names started emerging from the evidence. Children whose abuse had been documented, buried, and forgotten. 10-year-old Sophia, whose mother had reported Marcus in Riverside County 3 years ago. The case had been closed. Sophia's family moved away 6 months later, broken and afraid. 12-year-old Jackson, whose behavioral problems at school had been signs of trauma everyone missed. 9-year-old Lily, who tried to tell a school counselor and been accused of seeking attention. 7-year-old Noah, whose foster parents had filed reports that went nowhere. Each name represented a childhood stolen. Each name represented a failure of every system designed to protect the vulnerable. The team documented each victim with care, reaching out to families, offering resources, beginning the long process of accountability and healing. But the FBI's biggest discovery wasn't on those hard drives, wasn't in the financial records, wasn't in the files at the police department. It was buried in Marcus's military records from 23 years ago, records that had been sealed, classified, hidden behind bureaucratic walls that required federal warrants to penetrate. A secret so explosive it would reach the U.S. Senate and expose a cover-up that went far beyond one small town in Texas. The military records arrived at the FBI field office in a sealed envelope marked with classification stamps that had expired 6 months earlier. Someone in the Department of Defense had been sitting on a warrant request, dragging their feet, protecting institutional reputation over justice. But once the scope of the case became clear, once senators started asking questions about how a known predator had slipped through the cracks, the records materialized with sudden bureaucratic efficiency. Detective Wu opened the file and started reading. With each page, the picture became clearer and uglier. Marcus James Hale didn't exist until 7 years ago. Before that, he was Marcus Anthony Russo, United States Marine Corps, stationed at Camp Pendleton, California. His service record looked exemplary for the first 4 years. Commendations, promotion to corporal, exemplary conduct ratings. Then, 23 years ago, everything changed. A complaint filed by Staff Sergeant Robert Chun alleged that Corporal Russo had sexually assaulted Chun's 13-year-old daughter during a family event at base housing. The girl's statement was detailed and credible. Physical evidence supported her claims. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service opened a case file that should have led to court-martial and prison time. Instead, Russo received a dishonorable discharge for conduct unbecoming a Marine. Military speak designed to bury the details, protect the institution, avoid the publicity of a full trial. He was discharged quietly. No criminal charges filed in civilian court. No sex offender registration. Nothing that would follow him into civilian life beyond a discharge status that he could explain away as personality conflicts or minor infractions. The system had given him a fresh start, and he'd used it to refine his predation. Marcus Anthony Russo legally changed his name through a court in Nevada, a jurisdiction known for processing name changes with minimal scrutiny. He became Marcus James Hale. New name, new background check that showed nothing because databases didn't communicate across state lines the way they should. He applied to law enforcement agencies, leveraging contacts he'd made during his military service. Other veterans who'd gone into police work, who vouched for him, who didn't ask too many questions. Riverside County Sheriff's Department hired him 6 years ago. When the complaints started there, when parents began asking uncomfortable questions, Sheriff Marcus Webb, himself a former Marine who believed in taking care of his own, helped facilitate a quiet transfer. A letter of recommendation that mentioned none of the allegations, a personnel file that had been selectively edited. Another fresh start in Harlanville, where Chief Harlan Reed accepted the recommendation of a fellow law enforcement officer and asked no follow-up questions. But the deepest revelation was still coming. FBI investigators pulled phone records, financial transactions, family trees, and they found the connection that explained how Marcus had operated with such impunity for so long. Deborah Chun, the 911 dispatcher who'd buried Aisha's desperate call for help, wasn't just Marcus's friend. She was his half-sister, same father, different mothers. They'd reconnected 8 years ago through a genealogy website, discovered their shared parentage, and maintained a relationship that no one in Harlanville knew about. When Marcus moved to Harlanville 3 years ago, Deborah was already working as a dispatcher. She became his early warning system, his first line of defense. Every 911 call that mentioned Marcus's name went through her first. She'd reroute them, mark them as non-emergency, lose them in administrative backlogs. She'd been doing this for 3 years, systematically protecting her brother while children suffered. Bank records showed Marcus had paid her $43,000 during that time. Insurance against exposure, payment for silence. The final accounting was staggering. 14 verified victims across 3 states, California, Texas, and Oklahoma. Children whose abuse had been documented, whose voices had been ignored, whose cases had been buried by people who should have protected them. 27 additional suspected cases still under investigation. Children who'd shown signs of trauma, whose families had made informal complaints that never became official reports, whose suffering had been invisible to everyone except the predator who caused it. In a hotel room on the outskirts of Harlanville, Tanya Johnson sat on the edge of a bed and tried to understand how she'd missed everything. The FBI had taken her statement, shown her evidence she couldn't deny, walked her through timeline after timeline of abuse that had happened in her own home, while she worked double shifts to keep food on the table. She'd genuinely not known. The FBI psychiatrist confirmed it. Tanya wasn't complicit in the way Chief Reed was complicit. She was a victim of manipulation. A single mother so desperate for stability that she'd ignored warning signs, dismissed her daughter's behavioral changes, believed Marcus's explanations because believing anything else meant admitting her judgment had failed catastrophically. But not knowing didn't erase the guilt. Didn't change the fact that her daughter had been tortured while Tanya chose to see what she wanted to see. Didn't undo the moment when Aisha had begged for help and Tanya had called her a liar. The breakdown was complete and devastating. Tanya couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, spent hours rocking and crying, repeating over and over that she was sorry, that she should have known that she'd chosen a monster over her own child. The FBI arranged for psychiatric care, crisis intervention, because Tanya Johnson was a suicide risk, and they needed her alive to testify. Back in Harlanville, the community was experiencing its own reckoning. The FBI's investigation had expanded beyond Marcus and Chief Reed. They were interviewing every officer who'd handled abuse reports in the past 5 years. Every school administrator who'd received complaints and done nothing. Every mandatory reporter who'd seen signs and stayed silent. Every neighbor who'd heard things and looked the other way. The local newspaper, which had published glowing profiles of Deputy Hale, now ran front-page stories about systemic failure and institutional betrayal. The town council called emergency meetings. The state attorney general announced a comprehensive review of child protection services across the region. 2 school principals resigned. The head of county social services was placed on administrative leave. But the questions lingered, heavy and accusing. How many people had known and said nothing? How many had suspected and chosen comfort over conscience? How many times had Harlanville collectively decided that protecting its image was more important than protecting its children? The FBI's Victim Services Coordinator began reaching out to families, offering counseling, resources, validation. For years, these parents and children had been told they were wrong, that they'd misunderstood, that their memories couldn't be trusted. Now, finally, someone was telling them the truth. "You were right. We failed you, and we're sorry." But Aisha was safe. Her forensic interview had been completed. She was placed in emergency foster care with a family trained in trauma-informed care, a couple who understood that healing takes time, and setbacks are part of the process. She asked about Jax every day, asked when she could see him, asked if he was in trouble because of her. And Jax was in trouble. Deep trouble. Because while Marcus was finished, while the evidence against him was overwhelming and irrefutable, Jax had still committed felony kidnapping. He'd violated a restraining order. He'd taken a child from her legal guardian without authority or permission, and the prosecutor, despite understanding why Jax had done it, had no choice but to pursue charges. The national media arrived in Harlanville like a storm front, satellite trucks lining Main Street, reporters doing stand-ups in front of the police station and the Johnson trailer. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all the networks that usually ignored small-town Texas suddenly found Harlanville fascinating. The story had everything they needed: corruption, child abuse, a hero who looked like a villain, a system that had failed spectacularly. The headlines wrote themselves. Outlaw bikers save girl after system fails. Motorcycle club president faces prison for rescuing abuse victim. When badges become weapons. How one town protected a predator. Within 48 hours, Jax's story had gone viral. 5 million views on the first news segment. 10 million shares on social media. Everyone had an opinion about whether he was a hero or a criminal, whether the law should bend for morality or stay rigid regardless of circumstances. Legal analysts appeared on every news program explaining the complexity with varying degrees of sympathy. Jax had technically violated multiple laws. The restraining order was legally valid when he crossed it. Custodial interference was a felony regardless of motive. Some argued he could face additional charges, breaking and entering, possibly assault if Marcus claimed Jax had threatened him during the confrontation. The law, they explained with clinical precision, doesn't care about intentions. It cares about actions. District Attorney Patricia Voss sat in her office and stared at the file on her desk. She was 52, a career prosecutor who'd built her reputation on being tough but fair. She'd put away murderers, rapists, gang members who terrorized communities. She believed in the rule of law, in the principle that justice couldn't be selective, couldn't depend on whether you liked the defendant or agreed with their choices. But she also had a 13-year-old daughter at home, and every time she read Aisha's forensic interview transcript, she imagined her own daughter in that bathroom, locked in, bleeding, calling for help that never came. She imagined what she would want someone to do if her child was suffering and the system had failed. Politically, she had to prosecute. The law was clear. Jax had broken it. If she let him walk because public sentiment sided with him, she'd set a precedent that would haunt her office for years. Vigilante justice couldn't be endorsed, even when the vigilante was right. But morally, she knew Jax had done what any decent human being would do, what any parent would want someone to do for their child. The pressure came from all sides. Her boss, the Attorney General, suggested she consider the optics, the message it would send if they went hard on someone who'd saved a child's life. Defense attorneys called her, offering to represent Jax pro bono, warning her that this case would define her legacy. Victim advocacy groups sent letters supporting Jax, arguing that prosecuting him would discourage others from intervening when they witnessed abuse. And then there was the public response. Someone started a GoFundMe for Jax's defense. The goal was $50,000 for legal fees. Within 72 hours, it had raised $3.2 million. Donations came from every state from people who'd never met Jax, who just believed that good people shouldn't be punished for doing the right thing. The comment section was filled with stories. People who wished someone had saved them when they were children. People who tried to report abuse and been ignored. People who understood that sometimes the system fails so completely that individuals have to step in. In Harlanville, 847 residents signed a petition demanding the charges be dropped. They delivered it to the district attorney's office in person, a line of people stretching down the courthouse steps. Some were people who'd initially defended Marcus, who now felt the weight of their mistake and wanted to make it right. Some were parents who couldn't imagine standing by while a child suffered. Some were survivors themselves, finding their voice for the first time. But the legal system doesn't work on feelings. It doesn't work on petitions or GoFundMe campaigns or public opinion polls. It works on law, on precedent, on the principle that everyone, even heroes, must answer for their actions. District Attorney Voss filed formal charges: kidnapping in the first degree, custodial interference, violation of a protective order. Jax would stand trial, and a jury would decide whether justice meant following the letter of the law or honoring its spirit. If you believe good people shouldn't be punished for doing the right thing, comment Justice for Jax. Let's show that humanity hasn't forgotten how to stand up for its protectors. Share this story everywhere. Jax's fate came down to 12 strangers in a jury box. But what happened during jury deliberations would restore your faith in everyday Americans. The trial lasted 6 days, though it felt like 6 months to everyone watching. Jax's defense attorney, a woman named Margaret Chun, who'd taken the case pro bono after seeing the news coverage, built her case around a single principle: necessity. The necessity defense argues that breaking the law is justified when it prevents greater harm. When every legal option has been exhausted, when the choice is between action and catastrophe. She presented the evidence methodically: the 911 call that had been buried, the hospital report that had been ignored, the restraining order that had been weaponized to silence the only people watching, the systematic failure of every institution designed to protect children. She argued that Jax hadn't acted rashly or violently. He tried the legal system first. He'd reported to CPS, to the hospital, to the police. He'd done everything right, and the system had failed at every turn. The prosecution's case was simpler. Laws exist for a reason. You can't let people take matters into their own hands, no matter how sympathetic their motives. If Jax walks free, what message does that send? That anyone who disagrees with a court order can violate it if they think they're right. That's not justice. That's chaos. But then came the testimony that changed everything. Aisha appeared via closed-circuit video from another room. A therapy dog named Bailey sitting beside her, his head resting on her lap. She was 7 now, small for her age, wearing a purple dress her foster mother had helped her pick out. She answered questions in a voice that was stronger than it had been 8 months ago, though still fragile. She described what Marcus had done. She described calling 911 and being told she was confused. She described Jax finding her in that bathroom, promising she was safe, keeping that promise even though it meant losing his freedom. The jury watched her in silence. 3 of them were crying. Dr. Vargas testified about the pattern she'd seen, about 3 other children with identical injuries, about reports she'd filed that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. She testified that in 23 years of emergency medicine, she'd never seen a clearer case of systematic institutional failure. But Detective Wu's testimony was the moment that sealed Jax's fate. She walked the jury through the FBI's investigation, explaining how Jax's action, his refusal to look away, his decision to act when the system wouldn't, had triggered a federal case that exposed an interstate trafficking network. Because of Jax, 14 verified victims across 3 states got justice. Because of Jax, 27 additional cases were being investigated. Because of Jax, a predator who'd operated for 8 years was finally stopped. Without his intervention, Detective Wu said, looking directly at the jury. Aisha Johnson would likely be dead or missing within a month. Marcus Russo was planning to leave the state with her. We had evidence of his preparations. Jax didn't just save one child. He broke open a case that will protect countless others. The sentences for Marcus's network came down before Jax's trial concluded. Marcus Anthony Russo received 7 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. The judge reading the sentence said the crimes were so heinous, so systematic, so devoid of humanity that rehabilitation was impossible. Chief Harlan Reed received 18 years in federal prison for corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. He'd be 71 when released, assuming he survived that long. Dispatcher Deborah Chun got 6 years for obstruction of justice. She'd helped bury dozens of calls, helped protect her brother while children suffered. Jax's jury received their instructions and retired to deliberate at 2:15 on a Thursday afternoon. The legal analysts on television predicted hours of debate, possibly a hung jury. The charges were serious. The law was clear. 48 minutes later, the jury returned. The foreman, a retired teacher named Robert Mills, stood when the judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of kidnapping in the first degree, how do you find?" "Not guilty. On the charge of custodial interference." "Not guilty. On the charge of violation of a protective order, not guilty." The courtroom erupted. People stood cheering, crying, embracing strangers. The judge, who should have called for order, who should have demanded silence, instead sat back and let it happen. Because sometimes justice isn't just about law. Sometimes it's about recognizing that 12 ordinary people understood something the system had missed. That mercy and morality matter as much as statutes and precedents. Jax stood at the defense table, hands shaking, unable to fully process what he was hearing. Margaret Chun put her hand on his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. In the gallery, every member of Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club stood together, brothers to the end. Somewhere in a foster home across town, Aisha was in her therapy session playing with dolls, slowly learning that the world could be safe again. She smiled at something her therapist said. The first genuine smile anyone had seen from her in months. She picked up a crayon and drew a picture. A motorcycle and a man with kind eyes. She was learning to play with other children at her new school. Learning that not every adult would hurt her. Learning that her voice mattered. The healing was slow, measured in tiny victories. A full night's sleep without nightmares. A moment of laughter. A day without flinching when someone moved too quickly. 1 year later, Harlanville looked the same from the outside. Same hardware store, same diner with the chipped coffee mugs, same church bells on Sunday mornings. But underneath, everything had changed. Aisha turned 7 in the home of David and Karen Roberts, a foster family who'd been trained in trauma-informed care, who understood that healing doesn't follow straight lines. She had her own room painted the color she chose, lavender, with bookshelves full of stories where good always wins. She went to therapy every Wednesday with Dr. Sarah Hoffman, the same woman who'd conducted her forensic interview, the one person Aisha trusted to hear the hard things without flinching. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less often. She was learning to be a child again. Slowly, carefully, one small victory at a time. She played soccer now, had 2 best friends at school, and every single night before bed, she asked her foster mother the same question. "Is Mr. Jax okay?" Jax returned to Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, back to the scarred wooden table and the smell of motor oil, and the brotherhood that had stood with him when the whole world was watching. But he was different now. The case had changed him, opened something in his chest that had been closed for 37 years since he was the child nobody saved. He started volunteering with foster youth advocacy programs, showing up at group homes to talk with kids who'd been through hell, who needed to hear from someone who understood. He didn't preach or lecture, he just listened, and sometimes that was enough. Harlanville Police Department had been gutted and rebuilt from the foundation up. New chief, new protocols, mandatory training on abuse reporting that every officer had to complete quarterly. They brought in outside consultants to review every closed case from the past decade, looking for patterns, looking for victims who'd fallen through cracks that had been deliberately widened. The department would never fully recover its reputation, but they were trying. And trying, at least, was better than the willful blindness that had come before. The Texas state legislature passed what they called Aisha's Law in a rare unanimous vote. The law required independent review of all closed child abuse cases, mandatory reporting with penalties for officials who bury complaints, and whistleblower protections for anyone who reported abuse within law enforcement. It wouldn't fix everything. Laws never do. But it was a foundation, a starting place for building something better. Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club found themselves in the strangest position they'd ever experienced, being welcomed. The elementary school invited them to participate in child safety programs, teaching kids about stranger danger and how to ask for help. The town council asked them to join community watch efforts. Parents who'd once crossed the street to avoid them now stopped to shake their hands. The club's reputation had transformed from outlaws to protectors, though the members themselves hadn't changed. They were still the same flawed men working on their bikes and drinking too warm beer. But Harlanville had learned something about assumptions, about how badges don't guarantee goodness, and leather jackets don't guarantee evil. Tanya Johnson was still in Harlanville, though barely. She'd completed 18 months of court-mandated therapy, working through trauma and guilt, and the question that haunted her every waking moment. How did I not see? She had supervised visitation with Aisha twice a month, carefully monitored sessions where she was learning to be the mother her daughter needed, learning to believe her daughter instead of the men who lied. The relationship was fragile, built on apologies that could never be adequate, and a little girl's capacity for forgiveness that exceeded anything adults deserved. Tanya would never get full custody back. That bridge had burned too completely, but maybe someday they could have something. Maybe that would be enough. On a Tuesday afternoon in August, Jax received an envelope at the clubhouse. No return address, but he recognized the handwriting on the front. The careful, oversized letters of a 7-year-old still learning cursive. Inside was a drawing, a motorcycle rendered in crayon, a figure with a beard sitting on it, and a smaller figure standing beside it holding a stuffed rabbit. At the bottom, in purple marker, 6 words: "Thank you for being brave. Love, Aisha." Jax hung that drawing on the wall of the clubhouse right next to the Iron Wolves MC charter from 1987, and every man who walked into that room understood what it meant. Understood that sometimes being brave means breaking rules that shouldn't exist. Understood that sometimes the people society fears are the ones who save us. Sometimes the people society fears are the ones who save us. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms, but from ordinary people who refuse to look away. Aisha's story shouldn't have needed outlaw bikers to intervene. But until we build systems that protect the vulnerable instead of the powerful, we need people brave enough to break unjust rules. Jax and Iron Wolves MC didn't just save one little girl. They proved that humanity still exists in the unlikeliest places, and that sometimes the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. These men did something. If this story moved you, if you believe children deserve protectors, hit that subscribe button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Comment "Break the Silence" if you stand with survivors over systems that fail them. And remember, you don't need a motorcycle to be someone's hero. You just need to refuse to look away. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being part of the solution.